Welcome back, everyone, to a very special episode of Water Hose Drinkers. This is another hose history episode. We're going to be talking a little bit about D-Day today. Josh, how we feeling? How we doing?
Episode 3 out. I'm excited, man. It is Tuesday here in the state of Georgia, and D-Day, World War II is I've obviously expressed my opinion on how much I feel about doing research on World War II. So this is a part of that. I enjoy this conversation, so we're going to continue it.
I'm sure everybody's aware of what D-Day is and when it happened, but hopefully we're going to teach you some new things today. The largest amphibious assault in human history occurred on June 6th, 1944. So let's go ahead and jump into it.
Yeah, so like Alex said, D-Day was the name given to the June 6, 1944 invasion of the beaches of Normandy in northern France by troops of the United States, Canada, and the UK and other countries during World War II. France at the time was occupied by the armies of Nazi Germany, and the amphibious assault, like Alex said just a second ago, condemned Operation Overlord. It landed some 156,000 Allied troops on the beaches of Normandy by the end of the day. So
So
156,000 Allied troops were on the beach of Normandy from start to finish.
first off, Operation Overlord sounds way cooler than D-Day. So I love going by Operation Overlord. So as a whole, the operation was a massive success, but this number is speculated because I've checked a couple of different websites. For the most part, the best estimate is that around 4,000 Allied troops lost their lives today to the Germans defending the beaches. At the time of the invasion, it was the largest naval, air, and land operation in history. And within a few days, about 326,000, more than 326,000 troops, more than 50,000 vehicles, and some 100,000 tons of equipment had landed on the beaches of Normandy.
Yeah, so like Alex said, I mean, there is not, 4,000 Allied troops killed is a rough estimate. It is not the actual number of fallen soldiers that we had that day on not only just the United States, just Allied troops as well. I mean, it was, probably the most bloodiest day in war history with the United States and the Allied troops. So by August of 1944, all of northern France had been liberated. And in the spring of 1945, the Allies had defeated the Germans. Historians often refer to D-Day as the beginning of the end of World War II.
So, talking a little bit about the preparation for D-Day, obviously World War II began. Germany invaded and occupied northwestern France beginning in May 1940. The Americans entered the war in December 41 because of Pearl Harbor, which we've already had a host history episode on. By 1942, they and the British, they being the French, had evacuated from the beaches of Dunkirk and, sorry, I lost my place, after being cut off by the Germans, and they were considering a possibility of a major Allied invasion across the English Channel, which at the time did not seem liable.
No, it did not. And, to kind of what you just said, I mean, it is a hard preparation for it. And, the English Channel was a hard task for the Allied troops to, you know, invade. And it was going to be difficult, and they knew they were going to lose a lot of troops, unfortunately. So the following year, the Allied plans for a cross-channel invasion began to ramp up. In November of 1943, Adolf Hitler, who was aware of the threat of an invasion along France's northern coast, put Erwin Rommel in charge of spearheading the defense operations in the region, even though the Germans did not know exactly where the Allies would strike. So meaning Hitler was aware of the invasion, but he didn't know where it was going to take place across the channel.
So Hitler put General Rommel in charge of finishing the Atlantic Wall, which is a 2,400-mile fortification along the coast of France, running from Normandy to Spain, essentially. Interesting little tidbit here is Rommel really suspected that the Allies would attack Normandy, while Hitler thought that it would be closer to the northern side of France, the closest crossing from Germany, or from England, rather, across the English Channel. Rommel really thought that it was going to be Normandy, so he requested that multiple Panzer tank divisions be placed on the coast there, but Hitler demanded that the Panzer tank divisions remain in Paris. So Rommel only had one Panzer tank division at his disposal to defend Normandy. And it's kind of speculated, with an operation this big, any tiny little decision could make it go either way. And it's speculated that if Rommel had his wish and he had all of the Panzer tanks to defend the beaches of Normandy, things would have turned out very poorly for the Allies.
Which is crazy that things would have turned out poorly in as many troops as we lost. Obviously we said 4,000 was a rough estimate. I don't know the number on the other side, the Germans and all that of how many
I
people.
got here. So okay, the German deaths is wildly speculated. It says between 4 and 9,000 German deaths. On here, it has 4,400 Allied deaths and 10,000 total Allied casualties. Just breaking it down by country, out of the 10,250 casualties, it says 6,600 US, 2,700 UK, and 950 Canadian troops.
Oh my gosh, dude. I mean, it's unreal to think about how many people that is, honestly.
Also, another cool thing that I was finding out doing a little bit of research is this was not just a American, English, and Canadian invasion. French soldiers were involved, Australian soldiers were involved, Czechoslovakian troops were involved, or rather Czech troops. Um, Belgian soldiers were involved. This was like, now obviously the U.S. and England were you know, they were carrying the load, but there were over 10 allied countries involved in this thing. I mean, I feel like people don't fully appreciate the scale of D-Day and what it took to keep it secret and what it took to make it successful. It's just unreal.
For sure. I mean, the secrecy of the whole thing, like we said just a minute ago, the Germans were prepared that an attack was going to come, but they just didn't know where. Where are we at again, Alec? I'm sorry. Is it on June 6, 44?
Yeah, I think we're there.
Okay. So sorry, I just kind of got it mixed up when I was printing things out. But on June 6, 1944, more than 1,000 set up 156,000 American, British, and Canadian troops and a little bit more countries, like Alex said, stormed 50 miles of Normandy's fiercely defended beaches in the northern France in an operation that proved to be critical in the turning point in World War II.
So the primary leaders involved in this whole deal were FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, the President of the United States. Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister of Great Britain. They knew from the very start of the war that a massive invasion of mainland Europe would be critical to relieve pressure from the Soviet army fighting the Nazis in the East. I mean, just warfare 101, you want to make your enemy fight a two-front war. And up to this point, since the English and French troops have been pushed out at Dunkirk, they were essentially fighting a one-front war. Now, I mean, you can make the argument they were fighting in Africa and such, but the only real threat to pushing into Germany up until 1944 was the Soviets from the east. So they knew that we had to invade France at some point, or Germany was going to outlast Russia.
Yeah, like Alex said, just to clarify again, this was German occupied France. So when Alex says invading Germany, he also, like he said, it's France, German
Oh
occupied.
yeah,
No. You said it right. I just wanted to clarify it again. That's all.
Part of Nazi occupied territory, which was a massive expanse of land by this time in 1944.
No kidding. It really was. So, Operation Overlord or D-Day was launched from England. The U.S. military had to ship 7 million tons of supplies to the Staging area, including 450,000 tons of ammunition. And the ammunition is shown in the town square of Moreton in Marsh, England, ahead of the invasion. So, meaning they put 450,000 tons of ammunition in the town square, and for all the troops to just come load up their ammunition, get ready to fight. I mean,
Essentially, the
tons of
entire
supplies too. I mean, it's crazy how many. Sorry to interrupt you. I mean, 7 million tons of supplies, 450,000 tons of ammunition. It's just ridiculous to think of that numbers.
oh, I had a couple more numbers. There were 11,500 aircraft, over 6,000 sea vessels. Can't remember how many ground vehicles. But yeah, massive scale. Think about the biggest scale military operation that you can think of in modern history and literally quadruple it. So, D-Day invasion was scheduled for June 5th, but inclement weather happened. Allied, I don't know what you want to call them, the weathermen of the Allies figured out that there was going to be a break in the storm on June 6th. So that's why the Operation Overlord was pushed back to June 6th. In the pre-dawn hours of that day, thousands of paratroopers would land inland on the Utah and Sword beaches in an attempt to cut off exits and destroy bridges to slow the Nazi reinforcements.
So, I just kind of want to backtrack for a second. And like you said before you read that last little part, I mean, the vehicles that we had, we might mention it here coming up, but the vehicles they had was they were aquatic, so they would drive up in the water, and they would also be like kind of somewhat tanks and pull up on the shore and drop people off and unload the door, right? So they also had wheels on it to, you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So U.S. Army infantrymen approaching Omaha Beach, Normandy, France. On June 6, 1944, the first waves of American fighters were cut down in droves by German machine gun fire as they scrambled across the mine-riddled beach. So just picture if you've seen Saving Private Ryan, if you really just kind of seen pretty much the opening scenes of that movie, you would kind of understand what we're talking about.
Yeah. So I apologize if I start putting stuff in that we're going to get to eventually. It's just exciting to talk to, so or talk about. So I like putting a bunch of stuff in. There were 5 primary beach landings, those being Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. Sword was made up of English and French soldiers. Juneau's mostly Canadian troops. Gold mostly English troops. Omaha and Utah were mostly American troops. Now, Omaha Beach is what Saving Private Ryan depicted. That was where the fighting was the absolute fiercest. Just a couple of numbers for those right there. Roughly 23,000 soldiers landed at Utah, 34,000 soldiers landed at Omaha, 25,000 soldiers landed at Gold, 21,000 at Juneau, and almost 30,000 landed at Sword. And that's not even including the roughly 25,000 paratroopers that dropped in behind those beaches to cut off supply lines and things like that. But at Omaha Beach, U.S. forces persisted through the day-long slog, pushing forward to a fortified seawall and then up steep bluffs to take out the Nazi artillery post by nightfall. Shown wounded U.S. soldiers lean against chalk cliffs. I don't think we have that picture up. But yeah, Omaha Beach was where the fighting was the absolute fiercest. That's where the U.S. took a lot of casualties. Yeah, again, I mean, Saving Private Ryan, any D-Day movies you've seen or TV shows, most likely depicting Omaha Beach.
Yeah, sorry. I should have cut that last part out. I wish we could actually show some pictures on here, but I don't know how it would work with YouTube and Twitter and stuff on copyright purposes, so I don't know how, those pictures are, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
anyway, so sorry if you want to see the pictures of this to really know where we're getting these articles at. It is off history.com. So it is very, very simple to find. So if you want to look it up yourself, please feel free to do it because if you're like us, it is extremely interesting to look at the pictures and also read the articles. So, anticipating an Allied invasion somewhere along the French coast, German forces had completed construction of the, in quotes, Atlantic Wall, which was a 2,400-mile line of bunkers, landmines, and beach and water obstacles. And a landmine is so basically what the picture is a landmine that is blown up by an Allied engineers. So basically, what we're seeing is a landmine that they found that nobody stepped on, but it was blown up by Allied engineers to disable the landmine.
So my next bit here is kind of talking or referring to some of the pictures that we were talking about on the historychannel.com, but I will just in place put an interesting little fact. The Allies rather put a ton of effort into concealing this operation. Now, I mean, imagine trying to conceal an operation that consisted of over, by the total 300,000 people. So what they did was on the shortest connection between England and France, where they thought the invasion would be, they made just dozens and thousands of inflatable vehicles, inflatable artillery, inflatable planes, all made of just, rubber, silicone, whatever. And so when German spy planes would fly over, they would see an amassment of vehicles, and that's where they thought the landing was going to be. I mean, dude, crazy amounts of deception put into this thing.
So, like Alex said, it was just a lot of planning that took place behind the scenes prior to the event. So in 1994, at the time, General Dwight Eisenhower was appointed commander of Operation Overlord. In the months and weeks before D-Day, the Allies carried out a massive deception operation intended to make the Germans think the main invasion target was, I'm going to botch this, Pas de Calais, a narrow, the narrowest point between Britain and France. So they chose to deceive the Germans, thinking they were going to attack there rather than the beaches of Normandy.
So yeah, that was kind of going along with what I was saying there. In addition, they led the Germans to believe that Norway and some other locations of Nazi-controlled territory might be potential invasion targets. Many tactics were used to carry out the deception, including fake equipment, Phantom Army commanded by George Patton, and suppose that was based in England, across from, I do not know how to pronounce that French word. There are plenty of double agents, fraudulent radio transmissions. I know French freedom fighters were cutting telephone lines and communication lines to German headquarters. Yeah, crazy stuff. Crazy amounts of thought went into this.
So yeah, Alec did mention earlier that there was a weather delay on June 5th, 1944. So Eisenhower selected June 5th, 1944 as a date for the invasion. However, bad weather on the days leading up to the Operation Overlord, caused it to be delayed 24 hours on the morning of June 5th after his meteorologist predicted improved conditions for the following day. Eisenhower gave the go-ahead for Operation Overlord. So meaning his meteorologists knew that June 6th would be the date that they would invade rather than June 5th. He told the troops, in quotes, "You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you," end quote.
Sorry, I was just looking something up real quick. So later that day, more than 5,000 ships and landing craft carrying troops and supplies left England for the trip across the Channel to France, while more than 11,000 aircraft were mobilized to provide air cover and support for the invasion.
So the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944. Frank DeVita describes landing on the beach. By dawn on June 6, thousands of paratroopers, like Alex said earlier, paratroopers and glider troops were already on the ground behind enemy lines, securing bridges and exit roads.
The actual amphibious land invasion began around 6:30 a.m. and the earliest landings were Utah and Omaha, while Gold, Juno, and Sword all occurred around 7:30, about an hour after the first two. The British and Canadians overcame light opposition to capture beaches codenamed Gold, Juno, and Sword, as did the Americans at Utah Beach. But as we were talking about, the heaviest resistance was at Omaha Beach, where there were over 2,000 casualties of American troops.
So, however, by the day's end, approximately 156,000 Allied troops had successfully stormed Normandy's beaches. According to some estimates, more than 4,000 Allied troops lost their lives on D-Day invasion, with thousands more wounded or missing. So, wounded or missing, 4,000 Allied reportedly lost their lives. That is a rough estimate. So I've seen, just on the internet. Of course, my sources here are the internet, but the real number is somewhere around 5,000. 4,500 to 5,000 people lost their lives that day on the Allied side.
Less than a week later, June 11th, the beaches were fully secured, and over 325,000 troops, more than 50,000 vehicles, and 100,000 tons of equipment had landed at Normandy.
For their part, the Germans suffered from confusion in the ranks and the absence of celebrated Commander Rommel, who was away on leave. At first, Hitler, believing the invasion was feint, designed to distract the Germans from a coming attack north of the Seine River, refused to release nearby divisions to join the counterattack. So, meaning Hitler thought that invasion was a setup for another attack coming north on the Seine River, so he delayed his troops to go to the beaches of Normandy, basically allowing the Allied troops to win that battle.
So, a big name of the game with this whole operation was dropping the paratroopers behind German lines to cut supply lines and cut reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Reinforcements had to be called from further afield, causing delays. Hitler also hesitated in calling for armored divisions to help in the defense. Moreover, the Germans were hampered by effective Allied air support, which took out many key bridges. Bridges were massive and forced the Germans to take long detours, as well as efficient Allied naval support, which helped to protect advancing Allied troops. I would like to throw in a little tidbit about efficient Allied naval support, and I want to talk about the USS Texas, possibly the most badass thing that I've ever heard about U.S. military operations. USS Texas, along with British cruiser Glasgow, arrived in Normandy on D-Day and entered the Omaha Beach Theater and were supporting U.S. troops advancing. But the guns on the USS Texas could not reach German artillery positions behind the beach. So what did those crazy bastards do? The sailors of the USS Texas flooded half of their ship so that the ship sat uneven in the water and their guns were at a correct angle to reach German artillery positions. They flooded half of their ship, threatening sinking it so that they could shoot over the beaches to hit German artillery. That's some of the craziest shit that I've ever heard.
I'm glad that you mentioned that because when I was doing research on this, I actually found that and I did not know about that. So I found out about that last week. So I forgot to write it down. So I'm actually very glad that you mentioned that because it is quite interesting that they're willing to risk their own lives of drowning just to fire the artillery onto the Germans. And honestly was a key just a key thing or just a key sacrifice that they had to make to win this battle.
Yeah, I don't know how you do a controlled flood of a battleship, but those crazy sons of guns, they did it. And yeah, it was a major component of the.
I would like to find out about that. So if anybody's in the Navy or knows something about that, please hit us up because that's actually kind of interesting. So in the ensuing weeks, the Allies fought their way across Normandy. They fought a way across the Normandy countryside in the face of the determined German resistance, as well as the dense landscape of the marshes and hedgerows. So they got to the beaches, and obviously around the beaches there's marshes, and just picture that they have to, walk through and crawl through the swampy territory just to, continue invade in their Nazi occupied France.
I was looking a little bit more about the USS Texas. So the Texas was firing 14-inch shells, which doesn't sound that big, but think about a shell over a foot long. That's some freaking ordnance right there. But then within the span of just 34 minutes, she'd fired 255 shells, a shocking comparison to the 300 shells that the USS Texas had fired in her previous operations. So shifted her focus to inland targets. 2,700 meters from shore was when their guns could no longer reach the German artillery positions. I'm trying to figure out how they flooded it. To lower the starboard side, the crew intentionally flooded the torpedo blister, lowering Texas an extra 2 degrees in the water. This was just the right angles for the battleship's guns to fire accurately and complete the mission. Most vessels would never voluntarily flood part of their hull, but this daring move embodied the spirit the Allied forces showed at Normandy and allowed for operations to be victorious. Interesting stuff.
It's absurd.
By the end of June,
yeah,
the Allies had seized the vital port of Cherbourg, landing approximately 850,000 men and 150,000 vehicles in Normandy, and were poised to continue their march across France.
So victory in Normandy. By the end of August 1944, the Allies had reached the Seine River. Paris was liberated, and the Germans had been removed from the northwestern France, effectively concluding the Battle of Normandy. The Allied forces then prepared to enter Germany, where they would meet up with Soviet troops moving in from the east. Which is
I want to find out.
Now that we met up with the Soviet troops, think about how bad, Stalin was, at that time, and we were allies with Russia, and how that is transpired today.
So obviously D-Day was probably the most, not probably, it was the most major event in World War II in terms of defeating the Germans. Once we had gained a successful foothold in France, it was the beginning of the end for Germany. Normandy invasion began to turn the tide against the Nazis. It was a really big psychological blow because they thought that their Atlantic Wall, quote unquote, was impenetrable. Also prevented Hitler from sending troops from France to build up his Eastern Front against the advancing Soviets. So, I mean, now that all of his forces in France are occupied, he couldn't reinforce the Eastern Front. Soviets start pushing in from the east. This was literally the beginning of the end.
Yeah, so the following spring, on May 8th, 1945, the Allies formally accepted the unconditional surrender from Nazi Germany. Hitler had committed suicide a week earlier on April 30th. So, like Alex said, D-Day was probably the most significant event of World War II. Obviously, I'd like to point out a Bastogne as well. Bastogne was a key turning point and significant event of World War II, but it was obviously not as bloody as D-Day. That is why, obviously, D-Day is the most significant event of World War II.
I would say the only other thing that comes close to those two is Stalingrad, which occurred in 1942 or 43, essentially where the Russians stopped German advancement into Russia and began to turn the tide in the war in the East and push them back. Yeah, I mean, if D-Day fails, nobody knows how that war turns out.
Yeah, and I mean, you're 100% right. And the butterfly effect of that, where would we be today of that if D-Day would have not gone our way?
We could be speaking German. You seen that show?
The man in the high,
Man,
the man
Man
in,
in the High. Was that you that was telling me about that?
yeah,
Yeah, I really want to watch it. It seems really
the
interesting,
man in the
but
high
it's
castle,
based.
the man in the high castle.
Yeah, it's basically a show about if the Axis powers won World War II, and essentially the eastern part of the U.S. is controlled by Germany, the western part of the U.S. is controlled by Japan. I think the central U.S. is still free, something along those lines. Yeah, I mean it's and there's so many different, just tiny little decisions that led to the Allied success. One of those being Rommel wanting the extra panzer divisions to defend the beaches of Normandy and Hitler demanding that they stay in Paris. I mean, that literally could have turned the tide right there. Or if the Allies had decided to go ahead on June 5th and the weather sunk ships or held up the landing, I mean, it just all these tiny, tiny little things have shaped the world that we currently live in.
100%. And one thing, when I was doing some research on why Hitler wanted to stay in Paris, because he wanted obviously to protect Paris. That's a significant, city in the world, not only in France, but he was so obsessed with not only Paris, but the art. And if you watch, have you seen Monuments Men?
I have not seen it, but I've heard great things about it.
So it is basically that they these people from the United States and the Allied forces were trying to protect the art, and Hitler was very obsessed with art, and he had a lot of it stored in France. And that's why he was so keen on France, because obviously it's a very artistic town. Mona Lisa, list goes on of why, Paris is, significant throughout the world. But that is one little tidbit I thought I should add.
Dude, speaking of Hitler and art slash artifacts, have you heard about the conspiracy theory that Hitler at one point possessed the spear of destiny, which is said to be the spear that pierced Jesus' side when he was on the cross? Let me
It
look
is a
up this real quick.
conspiracy. Do I believe it? No, but yes, it is a conspiracy.
Let's see if I can find something interesting on this.
I think most conspiracies I see, I find them more funny than anything, not necessarily that I believe. So this is something that we do not believe, but we find kind of entertaining. But yeah, I mean, it's go ahead.
I can't I can't tell if what I'm this looks like a TV show about it, but I can't tell if this is fictional or historically based. But yes, I mean there's absolutely no way to know for certain, but it has been speculated that Hitler obsessed over the Spear of Destiny and maybe perhaps obtained it from Rome. Oh, here's an Ask the Internet. This is definitely going to be true.
I just don't believe that Hitler obtained that.
I'm not sure that he did either. Just interesting though. But yeah, I mean, there's so many stories about the Nazis stealing artwork, stealing gold, stealing artifacts, and just stockpiling all this stuff. Because I mean, you think about it's such a good thing. I got my computer open right here. This helps so much. See, this I'm being my own Jamie right now.
I think basically, his obsession with art artifacts was he wanted to control the world and accumulate so many arts and artifacts. And he burned a lot of them because he knew the Americans and Allied troops were trying to obtain them, and he didn't want them to have them. So he wanted to put out his own, art and artifacts to make everything about him. And that's how psychopathic and crazy he was.
Well, I mean, also, I feel like it's another kind of people don't fully realize how big Nazi controlled territory was at the prime of the Third Reich. I mean, Norway and Finland, all the way down to Greece, as far west as France, as far east as almost Moscow. I mean, think about all of that territory, all of the history there, and all of just the, like we were talking about, art and artifacts and stuff like that that he could plunder from all of those countries.
The culture, man. I mean, that includes, arts and artifacts. Like the culture of differences of people is just insane. And there was a lot of lost arts and artifacts that he destroyed and his followers destroyed that are still, missing to this day.
Yeah, when y'all get a chance, just look up Nazi occupied territory at the prime of Hitler's reign. And it is, I promise you, whatever image you have in your head, it's more territory than what you think it is.
Yeah, and if you want to really get into art, watch Monuments Men. I believe it's still on Netflix right now.
I'm going to watch it.
It is very, 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 very good. And The Man in the High Castle is one that is just what if the Americans and Allied troops did not win World War II. So it's kind of a hypothetical thing. I believe it is still on Amazon Prime.
You want to hear the tabs that I have open right now?
Yeah.
What Hitler got wrong about D-Day, D-Day landings map, 10 facts about D-Day, the USS Texas, Hitler and the Spear of Destiny, Nazi occupied territory, UGA basketball, and my email.
Good mix of different things.
A mix.
Dude, man, it was a great episode 3 of Hose History. We need to kind of think what we're gonna do here in next couple weeks, may after the Super Bowl for sure.
Library of Alexandria. Since we've been talking about how
Yeah,
much stuff that Hitler destroyed, I want to do the Library of Alexandria.
I kind of like that. We were talking about the other day at your house after before or after we did the last episode, I think. But
Yep.
yeah, so look for the Library of Alexandria for episode 4 of Host History. It is definitely going to be after the Super Bowl. So probably here in 2 weeks. So, we're going to kind of recap on sports and do all that stuff. And, today, right now, is Tuesday, January 30th. Expect a episode 19 of Water Hose Drinkers podcast on Thursday, February 1st. And yeah, we got a lot to recap, and we'll definitely do a Super Bowl preview prior to the Super Bowl. I don't know when that will be. We
Yep.
got that out next week, but yeah, unfortunately we couldn't have the chicken coop today, which is all right, but we love them anyways. But chicken coop will be back in action on Thursday for the podcast, so we gotta love it, and we might have a special guest on Thursday if we can figure it out. We never know. And maybe we might have a couple celebrity guest pickers for the Super Bowl.
Well, dude, only thing for me is shout out the USS Texas.
Shout out the USS Texas. Holy shit. Shout out the freaking USS Texas. We'll end on that. Like and subscribe. Give us a follow on Twitter. Give us 5 stars. Y'all know the drill. It's for the rhythm, for the algorithm.
Yep.
All right, Al. See you, brother.
Peace.